evening, everybody, and welcome to Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Shelley Pruitt, and my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Mr. Ryan Roberts. Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
What
Good
up?
evening.
Everybody have a nice Valentine's Day?
Oh yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Did.
Fantastic.
Had a fantastic one. Can't complain too much.
Yeah. I went to a revolving sushi bar. That was pretty fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Went and picked up a free 50-inch TV, so that's
Hell
pretty cool.
yeah. And if you want to know what I got for Valentine's Day, become a Patreon member. So, gentlemen, tonight, Patreon. That's where it's at. So, gentlemen, tonight we are going to be talking about the tale of Bluebeard. Do you guys know the tale of Bluebeard?
I know nothing about this actually.
Nothing about this one.
Yeah.
I know Blackbeard and Pirates of the Caribbean, and that's about all that I got.
Well,
Johnny Depp.
know...
Does Johnny Depp make an appearance?
No, he does not. He does not. So we're going back into it's a fairy tale, but it's a fairy tale from the French, Louis XIV era, where they would stand up and they would try to be as bawdy as possible to tell these stories. And so this story has everything. You think, oh, fairy tale. How is this paranormal? Oh, just wait and see. Because not only am I going to tell you the story, I'm going to tell you the people that the fairy tale is based on. This is a combination of true crime, paranormal, and might be a little satanic ritual involved. So hang on.
What?
If you guys are ready, here we go. You ready?
All right, give it to me.
So we are heading back to my favorite place, the land of the fairy tale. Magical stories where animals can speak, fairy godmothers grant wishes, and the supernatural abounds. Now, many of the stories we know by heart, and they hold a special place in our childhoods. Because every little girl has dreamed of being a princess, and every little boy has practiced slaying a dragon. And the stories teach us right from wrong, and that good triumphs over evil. And as we tuck our children to bed, we delight in telling them about the heroes and the villains, the damsels in distress and the knights in shining armor. And all the stories end with the same line, and they all lived happily ever after. But these are the sanitized versions of the stories, cleaned up so as not to offend. The original versions of our favorite tales are far more sinister, far more gruesome, and far more disturbing. And the real people on which they're based are more suited for Dateline than Disney. Now, the original stories are full of violence, betrayal, control, sex, and murder. And the story tonight is one that Disney doesn't dare to touch.
Oh, my.
I mean, they've sanitized the Grimm's fairy tales. This must be fucking way worse.
So, Charles Perrault was born on January 12th in 1628 in Paris. He was the seventh child of a wealthy Parisian family, and he attended good schools and studied law before embarking on a career in government service. And Perrault also took part in the creation of the Academy of Sciences, as well as the restoration of the Academy of Painting. Now, in 1663, Charles was appointed as the secretary of the newly founded Academy of Inscription and Belles Letters, and he served under John Baptiste Colbert, finance minister to King Louis XIV. Now, King Louis XIII reigned when Charles was born, but in 1643, his son, Louis XIV, ascended to the throne at the age of 4. And Louis began to rule independently in 1661. Now, known as the Sun King, King Louis XIV was a great supporter of the arts, and during his reign, the French artistic world flourished. And the king held opulent parties, which often included exhibitions of paintings and musicians and singers and authors. And there were a few orgies in there as well.
Hell yes.
Yeah, there were some orgies. He was known for his orgies at his parties.
Hell yes.
And author Charles Perrault was a frequent guest at the king's lavish parties. And he would entertain with his versions of folk tales like Little Red Riding Hood. And he was a favorite among the guests. But despite his pandering to the crown, in 1695, at the age of 67, he lost his post as secretary. So out of a job, he decided to dedicate himself to writing stories. that were inspired by the oral traditions. And in 1697, he published Histories au Contes du Temps Passé, or Tales of Stories of the Past with Morals, subtitled The Tales of Mother Goose.
I'm going to commend you on that pronunciation. Good
I
job.
practiced that probably 300 times. And from this book are the fairy tales that we know: Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, Puss in Boots. And tucked away in the pages is the story of Bluebeard. So I'm going to tell you the story so you know what we're talking about.
Ooh, story time with Shelley.
Story time with Shelley. Ready for your nightmare before bed? Here we go.
Absolutely.
Now, once upon a time, there was a man who had a fine town and country houses, gold and silver plate, beautiful furniture, and golden coaches, wealth in abundance. But unfortunately, he had a blue beard. And the beard made him look so ugly and so terrible that there was not a girl or a woman who did not run away from him. Now, if he lived today, he might have found him a nice goth girl that would like that, but that wasn't the case.
Hell yeah.
Ryan's future.
Hell yeah.
Now, one of his neighbors, a lady of quality, had 2 daughters who were perfectly beautiful. And he went to the woman and proposed to marry one of them, leaving the decision to the mother to choose which of her daughters she would give him. Oh, but the daughters were horrified, and neither of them would have him. And they sent him back from one to the other, not being able to make up their minds to marry a man who had a blue beard. And what increased their distaste for him, even more than the blue beard, was that he had had several wives already, and no one knew what had become of them. So, in order to cultivate their acquaintance and show the ladies what kind of life might await them, Bluebeard took the ladies, their mother, 3 or 4 of their closest friends, and some young persons in the neighborhood to one of his grand estates. And they stayed for an entire week. It was a week of revelry and fun. There were excursions, hunting and fishing, parties and balls, entertainment and lavish feasts. And nobody went to bed. Whole nights were spent in lively games and merriment. And the week was such a success that the youngest daughter began to think that the beard of the man doesn't really look quite as blue as it used to. And so she decided that she thought him to be a very worthy man indeed. Now, in Perrault's version of this story, he doesn't give a name to the younger daughter. So I'm going to use the name Penelope because that's the name used in retellings of the story. So we're going to call the youngest daughter Penelope. And Penelope agreed to marry the man with the blue beard. And when they returned to town, they were immediately married, and they moved on to one of his grand country estates. And at the end of 1 month, Bluebeard told his wife that he had to take a journey. The matter was of great consequence to him, and he would be gone at least 6 weeks. But he told her not to worry, that she should amuse herself as much as she could during his absence. He told her to invite her best friends and take them into the country with her if she wanted, and to make sure she kept them very well fed and very happy. And then Bluebeard said to her, "Here are the keys to my 2 great storerooms. Here are the keys to the chest which the gold and silver plate are kept that is only used on particular occasions. These are the keys to the strong boxes in which I keep my money. These open the casks that contain my jewels. And this is the pass key to all of the rooms in all of my estates. And as for this last little key, it's for the closet at the end of the long hall on the ground floor. Open everything, go everywhere, except into that little closet, which I forbid you to enter. And I forbid you so strictly that if you should venture to open the door, there is nothing that you may not have to dread from my anger." Well, Penelope promised and observed implicitly all of his direction. And after he'd embraced her, he got on his horse and set out on his journey. Now, Penelope's friends wasted no time in arriving. They were eager to see all of the treasures inside the great mansion. And they had not dared enter while her husband was home because they were terrified of his blue beard. And the guests immediately began to run through all the rooms and closets and wardrobes, each being more beautiful and elaborate than the prior. They went into the storerooms and admired the number of elegant tapestries, carved furniture, and mirrors framed with gold and silver. All were beautiful and magnificent, and her friends complimented her good fortune to marry such a wealthy man. But Penelope was not entertained in the slightest by the sight of all the treasures. She was distracted by that little closet on the ground floor. And her curiosity increased, and she slipped away from her company and ran down the back staircase. Now, when she arrived at the door, she paused for a moment and remembered her husband's warning that there would be consequences for disobedience. Oh, but the temptation was so strong that she could not conquer it. She put the little key into the lock and opened the door.
Dummy.
The room was dark. The windows were closed, and at first she could see nothing. But as her eyes adjusted, a true horror was revealed. The floor was covered with clotted blood, and suspended from the walls were the dead bodies of several females. All had had their throats cut, and some had their head on their necks, and some were at their feet. And these were the wives of Bluebeard. He had murdered them one after another. And Penelope was terrified. She was shaking so badly that as she turned to run, she dropped the key. She quickly picked it up and scurried from the room and locked the door again. Panicked and unable to catch her breath, she hid in her chambers, trying to compose herself, the little key still clutched in her hand. And as she looked at the key, she noticed that something was different about it. There was blood on it. She wiped it several times, but the blood would not come off. And in vain she washed it and even scrubbed it with sand and freestone. But the blood remained. You see, the key had been enchanted, and there was no way to clean it completely. When the blood was washed off one side, it came back on the other. Now, Bluebeard returned that very evening. He said that he had received letters on the road informing him that the business had been settled to his advantage. And Penelope did all she could to convince him that she was delighted at his speedy return. And then the next morning, he asked for his keys. Penelope, with trembling hands, gave them to him. And after a moment of inspection, he asked, "How comes it that the key of the little closet is not with the others?" "I must have left it upstairs on my table." "Fail not," said Bluebeard, "to give it to me presently." Penelope stammered and searched for an excuse, but she was compelled to produce the key. "Why is there some blood on this key?" Poor Penelope, paler than death, answered in barely above a whisper, "I don't know." "You don't know?" bellowed Bluebeard. "Well, I know well enough. You entered the closet. Well, madam, you shall enter it and take your place amongst the ladies that you saw there." Penelope flung herself at her husband's feet, weeping and begging for his pardon, with all the signs of true repentance for having disobeyed him. Her beauty and affliction might have moved other men, but Bluebeard had a heart of stone. "You must die, madam, and immediately." Penelope looked up at him with streaming eyes and replied, "If I must die, please give me a little time to say my prayers." Bluebeard answered, "I will give you 15 minutes, but not a minute more." And Penelope fled. She fled to find her sister Anne and called her, "Sister Anne, go up, I pray thee, to the top of the tower and see if my brothers are coming. They have promised me that they would come to see me today, and if you see them, sign to them to make haste." So Anne hurried to the top of the tower, and as Penelope locked herself into her chambers, every few minutes she would call out, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anything coming?" And Anne answered her, "I see nothing but the sun making dust and the grass growing green." Bluebeard, had gathered his cutlass in his hand, and he bellowed, "Come down quickly, or I will come up there." "1 minute, if you please," Penelope begged. And then she repeated in a low voice, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anything coming?" Again, Anne replied, "I see nothing but the sun making dust and the grass growing green." And once again, Bluebeard roared, "Come down quickly, or I will come up there." I will come down," answered Penelope. And she called out once more, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anything coming?" And after a brief pause, Anne answered, "I see a great cloud of dust moving this way." And with hope in her voice, Penelope asked, "Is it my brothers?" "Alas, no, sister. It is a flock of sheep." "Will you not come down?" shouted Bluebeard. "Please, please, 1 more minute," Penelope answered. And in desperation, she called out one more time, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anything coming?" And Anne answered, "I see 2 horsemen coming this way. They are still at a great distance. Heaven be praised, they are my brothers. I am signaling to them to make haste. Come down now," and Bluebeard roared so loudly that the whole house shook. Unable to delay any longer, Penelope descended the stairs, and with streaming eyes and disheveled tresses, she threw herself at his feet. And staring coldly at her, he said, "It is of no use. You must die." And Bluebeard grabbed her by the hair and raised his cutlass. Penelope implored him, "Please allow me one short moment to collect myself." "No," he said, "recommend thyself heartily to heaven." And he lifted his arm. And suddenly there was a loud banging at the door, and the noise startled Bluebeard. The door flung open, and the 2 horsemen ran in with their swords drawn. And they ran straight at Bluebeard. He recognized them, his wife's brothers, one an infantry soldier and the other a musketeer. Bluebeard let go of Penelope and fled. But the men overtook him before he could reach the step of his door, and they ran their swords through his body until he lay dead on the floor. They helped their sister to her feet and held her close. Now it was found out that Bluebeard had no heirs, so all of his wealth, possessions, and property passed to his widow. And Penelope was now a very wealthy woman. So she used some of the money to marry her sister Anne to a young gentleman who had long been in love with her. And she used part to buy captain's commissions for her 2 brothers. And with the rest, she married herself to a worthy man who made her forget about the miserable time she had passed with Bluebeard.
I'm so glad that you finished that statement, because the way that it was worded, she used some of the money to marry her sister Anne. I'm glad you continued to a young gentleman who had blah 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 blah. Yeah, because I was like, whoa, wait, this is a whole different kind of story here. Holy shit.
And
Like-
that is Charles Perrault's version. Okay, this
Okay.
is the one that he told in the court of
Okay.
King Louis XIV. And
All
this is
right.
the one that he published for the first time in 1697. There have been there have been so many retellings of this, and so there are all kinds of different versions and everything. That is the original version.
Okay.
Okay.
So, all right, so we have an enchanted key. We have a murdering man. And we have a woman
Yeah.
who delays
Okay.
just long enough to save herself.
And we have the room full of dead bodies.
And the room full of dead bodies. Like I said, it's more
Yeah.
Dateline. But go ahead.
I'm really interested to see where this is about to go, because I know we cover
Right.
stories like this where we tell the story and then we break it down, because we all know in all fairy tales there is
a
but
grain.
a bit
Colonel.
of truth
There
in
is.
each one. So I'm
And
very
now-
interested to see where this is about to go.
I'm going to now tell you 2 stories.
Okay.
Because in actuality, there are 2 men that the story of Bluebeard is alleged to have been based on. And these are 2 very different stories. But the first one is about the man, and these are real live living people that lived at a time that are documented.
Okay.
And the first is Gilles de Rais. Now, if this were a fairy tale, we would start with a warning. But this is not a fairy tale. And before there was a story about a man called Bluebeard, there was a fear that people didn't have words for yet. It was a fear that lived in stone houses and great halls, and it lingered in the quiet after footsteps had faded. It was the unease of knowing that wealth could protect cruelty, and silence could be purchased as easily as land.
Mhm.
It's the kind of feeling that settles in your chest when something looks perfect on the outside but just feels wrong underneath.
Hmm.
Now, Gilles de Rais was born around 1405, and he wasn't rumor. He wasn't folklore. He was actually a national hero. Gilles was born into staggering wealth. He was orphaned young and inherited enormous estates, making him one of the wealthiest children in France. He was educated, cultured, and ambitious. And at 16, he saved the Duke of Brittany's life and was handsomely rewarded with massive land grants. As a teenager, he fought in the Hundred Years' War alongside Joan of Arc. He was brave, charismatic, handsome, and admired. And in his early 20s, at the coronation of King Charles VII of France, he was appointed Marshal of France for his bravery. Now, this is the highest military distinction in France, and it is awarded for exceptional achievements in war. And the award has perks. The recipient receives a huge bump in pay, elevated status, and a blue velvet-covered baton that is studded with gold stars. And this high honor was for the elite and the trusted military leaders responsible for major armies or campaigns, and it represented immense authority. So before he was 25, he was one of the most powerful men in the country. He wore shining armor of the best quality, he rode the most exquisite horses, and he stood next to a future saint. And the people trusted them with their lives. And then the wars ended. So without battles to fight, Gilles turned inward, and he returned to his estates in Brittany and Anjou. And his behavior changed. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but as Gilles withdrew from public life, he began to spend money on strange things. Now, wealthy nobles threw grandiose events all the time, but his spending grew extreme. He spent money like it was proof of his existence. He commissioned plays to be written that were filled with angels and demons, and elaborate sets and dramatic executions. And then he would stage the extravagant theatrical productions. Angels would descend from ceilings, demons would jump up from trapdoors, and the shows were so lavish that they often bankrupted entire villages when they were performed.
Jesus.
Holy crap.
Now, by the time he was 30, he was so wealthy that he gave up all monetary pursuits and began to study dark magic. And he grew
Mhm.
obsessed with alchemy and occult knowledge. He believed that forbidden wisdom could enhance his fortune and elevate his power. And he spent enormous sums on bizarre occult experiments. He kept alchemists, he hired occult practitioners, and he sought the philosopher's stone. He wanted knowledge that wasn't meant to be accessible, and he believed that his wealth could buy secrets, and there were doors in the universe that money could unlock. And if necessary, he was willing to purchase that knowledge with blood. And then the children began to disappear.
Mm.
Not the children of nobles, not the children of powerful families. The children that began to disappear were poor children, orphans, and were mostly boys. They began to disappear from back roads and villages and monasteries near Gilles de Rais' estates. And the disappearances followed a pattern. The children were lured inside by his servants with promises of food or work. And once inside the castle walls, the children were never seen again. And people noticed, but they didn't act. They suspected him, but they couldn't imagine being right. Accusing Gilles de Rais wasn't like accusing a neighbor. It meant standing against a war hero, a marshal of France, a man who fought with Joan of Arc. And no one would believe them. And so the disappearances continued for years.
Hmm.
Now, in 1440, Gilles de Rais was finally arrested, but it wasn't for murder. It was for financial misconduct and religious charges of heresy. And it was during the authorities' investigation that the full scope of his crimes emerged. And they were unspeakable. Gilles de Rais was put on trial for the murder of over 100 children.
Jesus.
Whoa.
Yeah, he's a bad dude.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened inside the walls of the castle is only known through trial testimony. And the trial records are detailed and horrifying. Servants testified that they were instructed, trigger warning, servants testified that they were instructed to bring the boys inside to rooms that had already been prepared. And the violence followed a pattern. The boys were tortured in the most disturbing of ways. And when the vile acts were completed to the satisfaction of Gilles de Rais, the children were killed in a ritualistic manner. Their bodies were disposed of in fireplaces or hidden pits under the cover of night. And the rooms were quickly washed clean so that another ceremony could begin. The testimony of the witnesses aligned too closely to ignore, and Gilles de Rais confessed. And his confession was chilling as well. He admitted to abusing his clerical property and taking advantage of his power to abduct, molest, sodomize, murder, and decapitate over 100 children as sacrifices in order to summon demons.
Jesus.
Jesus Christ. He sounds a lot like Elizabeth Bathory. Honestly.
Yes.
Mm.
In the course of the investigation, the remains of over 50 young men were discovered in his castle. And this was something I couldn't make add up, but he was actually found guilty on over 140 counts of murder.
Wow.
Found 50 in the castle. He was said to alleged to have killed over 100 children, but he was found guilty on 140 counts of murder. Now, I couldn't make any of that line up, and I did look, but that is what he was convicted on. And Gilles de Rais was hanged, and his body was burned on October the 26th of 1440. The Bloody Baron, as he had come to be known, was no more. So the question becomes, could he have been the true inspiration for Bluebeard? Even though the details are slightly different, the core of the story is the same. A powerful man, a locked door, victims hidden inside, and a community that suspected but didn't act. Gilles de Rais wasn't a monster lurking in the woods.
No.
He was a celebrated nobleman and a decorated soldier. And this is what makes him so terrifying. It wasn't just what he did, but how easily he moved through society while doing it. He was a 15th century aristocrat and prolific serial killer. And when the battles ended, something in him changed. Instead of glory, he sought the grotesque. He stepped from the light and into the darkness with lavish displays, arcane experiments, and horrors that would forever stain history. Now, whether or not Gilles de Rais directly inspired the tale, his life fits the emotional blueprint. A man insulated by wealth, admired publicly, feared privately, and protected by disbelief. So what do you think, guys? Could he be a possible candidate as the inspiration for Bluebeard?
I mean, a very Bluebeard would be a very sanitized version of him. I don't think that. I don't know. I mean, it fits the time period.
Could he? Absolutely, yes, he could. I mean, if we're talking about the 1440s, is whenever you said that Gilles de Rais was doing these horrific acts, and then you have 1600s. Am I correct in that? Later 1600s, I think, whenever Charles Perrault.
1697 is when Perrault publishes the story. Gilles de Rais is operating in the 1440.
So if you're looking at it from a folkloric standpoint and passing down oral traditions and stuff like that, you got roughly a 200-year span that the horrific acts are taking place, and then you have Bluebeard. I honestly think that would be enough time for a lot of detail to be changed,
Yeah.
molded over into, oh no, it was women instead of children, because they're not going to tell the story back in that time probably about children. They're probably going to change it to
an adult,
an adult, because that was definitely
thus
something that,
sanitizing it.
right, thus sanitizing it even further. Because during all of that time, I mean, not only that, but you got a lot of conflict going on. Obviously, you were just talking about wars, and stuff. So there's a lot of reframing to sanitize in a lot of different ways. So yeah, could he easily be a blueprint for Bluebeard? Absolutely. I mean, like you just said, the core elements of the story are there. He's insulated by wealth. He has a public profile. He is feared.
Trusted.
And he is this kind of protected by this, like, oh no, he could never do that, which is the exact same framing of Bluebeard. So I think he fits pretty well. The only hang up that I do have is the switching from children to women.
Okay. All right. Well, then let me give you the second story.
Okay.
And see if this fits the oral tradition of Bluebeard.
Well, now that I'm prepared of what kind of stories you're bringing to the table tonight, let me take a sip of water.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
As I was not prepared for that kind of story to come forth, girly.
Damn. Like I told you, fairy tales have very disturbing histories. That's why I love them so much.
Very true. Yes, they do.
Now, our second suspect, and I'm saying suspect, the second suspect for the inspiration of Bluebeard is a medieval ruler named Connemar the Accursed. Now, in 6th century Brittany, France. Excuse me, in 6th century Brittany. Let's start again. 6th century Brittany. France was a fractured land ruled by warlords and bound together by marriage alliances and blood debts. The records are thin, but what does survive comes from church writings and oral traditions. And there is a name that appears repeatedly. Connemar, sometimes known as Connemar the Accursed. He was a ruler that was so feared that people did not dare to speak his name, and if they did, it was only in whispers. And according to author Emile Sylvestre, he was a giant, one of the wickedest men, held in awe by everyone for his cruelty. As a boy, when he went out, his mother would ring a bell to warn people of his approach. And when unsuccessful in his chase, he would set his dogs on the peasants to tear them to pieces.
Fucking hell.
He was a man who took what he wanted, and he came to power by overthrowing and killing his predecessor, Jonas. Seeing Jonas's wife as one of the spoils of victory, he married her, and she had a young son named Judwal. But let's just say that Connemar was not really suited to be a parent. Now, some called him king, others a tyrant, but everyone agreed on his cruelty. And it wasn't long before he tried to murder his bride. But the woman managed to escape with her son to a rival court. And Connemar only became more brutal, more paranoid, and more obsessed with control. And one day, when he was out doing warlord things, he was made aware. I have to put in a little something humorous.
Sorry.
I have to. It's fine. Because this is such a horrible
warlord
story.
things. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just
Well, I
out.
mean, he was
What are
out
you
doing
doing?
warlord things. They said he was out on a journey and he was,
out.
plundering and pillaging. So I figured that's warlord stuff.
I'm out
So
with my
one day-
posse doing warlord things.
Yeah. So one day when he was out doing warlord things, he was made aware of a prophecy. Or perhaps it was more, he was made aware of a curse. It was told him by a soothsayer that one day he would be overthrown by the hand of a child. And that child would be his son. Now, in medieval Europe, marriage was not romance. It was alliance, survival, and control. And women were transferred like property, and powerful men were rarely questioned about what happened within the walls of their households. And according to multiple sources, Connemar married several women, and each mysteriously disappeared. And the villagers began to whisper about a ruler whose wives had vanished and noble households that changed servants regularly. And they also whisper about men whose generosity felt a little too rehearsed. Now, the stories did not accuse, they implied. Implication was safer, But the people had begun to believe that Conomer had murdered his wives, but they dared not to speak it. Conomer was feared even among the other rulers. His power was violence and intimidation. Marriage to him was not a privilege. It was a threat. And as he was marauding through the land, his eyes fell on the beautiful Tryphene, and he decided he must have her as his wife. Tryphene was a good and just young woman and the daughter of Warwick, the Count of Venice. But being known throughout the land for his cruelty and vices, Conomer could not persuade the girl or her father to agree to the marriage. So he resorted to another strategy. Warwick's lands had been devastated by fighting between rival petty rulers who had brought nothing but misery and bloodshed to the land. So he offered Warwick peace in exchange for the hand of Tryphene. But if he refused, Conomer was going to invade the court's land and kill everyone that stood in his way. So, fearing for the safety of her people, Tryphene agreed to marry Conomer, not because she loved him, but because not marrying him meant war. But she still needed the consent of her father.
You're not going to find that on a Hallmark card anywhere.
Yeah. I only married you because not marrying you means war.
Exactly.
Love
right.
Yeah. So the arrangements for the marriage were brokered by St. Gildas. And St. Gildas was a noted holy man who had come to Brittany in search of nothing more than a quiet spot where he could settle down as a hermit. But the constant fighting in the land had ended that hope. So Gildas had attached himself to Conomer's court in hope of converting that ravenous wolf into a meek lamb. And Gildas was sent to negotiate with the count. And eventually, the saint persuaded Warwick to accept the marriage proposal on the condition that St. Gildas himself would guarantee that Tryphene would be well treated, and should anything happen to her, that Gildas would restore her to him, healthy and whole, and guarantee her safety. Gildas gave his word to the worried father, and with a promise from a saint, Warwick agreed, and Conomer and Tryphene were married. Tryphene was immediately taken back to his castle and assumed her wifely duties. Now, Gildas took his promise very seriously, and he gave Tryphene a silver ring and told her to always wear it. It would warn her of approaching evil by turning black as a crow's wing. And he gave her the instruction that if she was ever in danger, to give it to a bird to deliver to him, and he would know to come to her. Now, for a short time, all was well, and Conomer made a concerted effort to be charming. But wedded bliss for the tyrant never lasted long. A young girl at court had caught his eye, and Conomer had fallen completely in love with her. And she only inflamed his passion when she took a tumble from a horse and he caught a glimpse of her shapely ankle.
Ooh.
Sorry, that always gets me. Not the ankle. I saw your ankle. Now I have to marry you.
And Conomer decided that he had found his next wife. And little did he know that Tryphene had become pregnant.
Uh-oh.
A few days later, her condition was confirmed. And overjoyed, she rushed to tell her husband. But instead of happiness, she was met with rage. Not understanding, she descended into the chapel to pray. And every time she opened the door to the holy room, she was chilled to her soul. Because that room, it was not just a chapel. It was also the castle crypt, a shrine to violence. It was filled with the skeletal remains, coffins, and relics of his previous wives. So Tryphene fell to her knees and began to pray. And before she said her final amen, she always included a prayer for the souls of the women entombed there. As Tryphene rose to depart, the clock struck midnight. But before she could leave, she was startled by the sudden sound of movement in the room. Terrified, she hid in the darkness as she watched the tombs of Conomer's wives open slowly. And suddenly she was overtaken by a vision. She saw the ghostly forms of the dead wives manifest in front of her. They whispered a warning that their husband, now hers, had slaughtered them. Faint with terror, Trifine tried to escape, but the specters called out, "Take care, poor lost one. Conomer seeks to kill you." Trifine froze and replied, "Me? What evil have I done?" And the phantoms answered, "You have told him that you will become a mother. And through the spirit of evil, he knows that it is his child, and he will slay him. He murdered us when we told him what he has just learned of you. You will soon join us in the crypt, because Conomer will not allow the prophecy to come to pass." Trifine cried out, "Then what hope of refuge remains for me?" "Go back to your father," the women answered. "But how will I escape Conomer's guard dog in the court?" The first wife's ghost came in close to Trifine and said, "Give him this poison which killed me." And a small bottle materialized in her hand. "But how will I climb the castle wall?" "Use this cord with which he strangled me," answered the ghost of the second wife, and a rope appeared at Trifine's feet. "But I am afraid. Who will guard me and guide me through the dark?" The phantom of the third wife spoke, "The fire that burned me will give you light to see." "Well, how will I make such a long journey?" Trifine asked. The figure of the fourth wife answered, "Take this stick which broke my skull." And the weapon appeared at her feet. Grateful, Trifine gathered the gifts from the spirits and ran from the crypt. Armed with the poison, the rope, and the stick, Trifine set out. She silenced the dog, used the rope to scale the wall, and pulled herself onto the back of the first horse available and rode away. And miraculously, she was guided through the darkness by an ethereal glowing light that preceded her on the road to Venice. Now, when Conomer discovered that Trifine had left the castle, he flew into a rage and set out to find her. Unfortunately for Trifine, the horse that she had chosen was a broken-down old nag that could barely manage a trot, and she did not get far before she heard the hoofbeats of Conomer closing in behind her, and her beautiful silver ring turned black. She jumped from her horse and ran into a thicket, desperately trying to hide herself. And seeing a crow in the tree, she took off her ring and tossed it up and beseeched the bird to find St. Gildas. The crow took the ring and flew away. But the brutal man quickly overtook her. He dragged her from her hiding place, and Trifine, with tears streaming down her face, begged her husband to spare her life and the life of their unborn child. But Conomer was unmoved. He lifted a sword, and with one vicious swing, he cut off her head. Now the crow found Gildas, and he dropped the ring at his feet. And a sick feeling overcame the holy man. Gildas and Trifine's servants set out to find their mistress. And when they found the poor girl, decapitated in the woods, they sent word to her father. The grieving count had his daughter and her head brought back to him in Venice. Gildas accompanied the sad procession to return the girl to her home. But once there, Warwick confronted Gildas and reminded the holy man of the promise he had made to keep Trifine safe, and should any harm come to her, that the man would restore the girl to him, healthy and whole. The man was asking for a miracle. So, summoning all of his faith, Gildas prayed fervently. And then he approached the body. He took the head of the beautiful Trifine and placed it on her neck. And in a voice powerful and sure, he spoke aloud, "Trifine, in the name of Almighty God, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, I command thee to rise upon thy feet and tell me where thou hast been. And before the assembled people, the lady rose up and said, the angels had been preparing a place for me in paradise among the saints when the words of you, St. Gildas, called my soul back to earth. Now, there are several versions as to how this story ends. I'm going to let you decide which one you like. Version 1. Having resurrected Tryphene, St. Gildas took his leave and traveled back to Conomer's fortress. The castle loomed on a rocky outcropping above the river. Now Conomer saw the saint approaching, and he closed the castle gates. Kneeling down, St. Gildas picked up a handful of dust and flung it against the castle walls. The walls began to shake and crumble, just like those of Jericho, and the fortress collapsed on the terrible tyrant, killing him. That is ending number 1. Now, in version 2 of the story, it's the same as above, but Conomer survives and escapes to his second stronghold. St. Gildas leads 30 bishops of Brittany to curse him, and Conomer is immediately seized with a terrible malady. He dies, and his soul is seen being carried away on a stream of blood. Version 3. Tryphene and her son are canonized as saints, and the prophecy is fulfilled. Conomer is killed in battle, but not by the son of Tryphene. He is killed by Judwal, the son by marriage of the wife that escaped. And I like that ending far better.
I like number 2. Number 2 is the most metal. That's pretty damn cool.
Of course that's your grading.
See, I think that's the most boring one. They chanted, and all of a sudden he's like, "Oh, I'm sick," and down he goes. He's done.
No, he's cursed, and his soul is carried away on a river of blood. That's fucking cool.
Oh, but wait, there is a postscript to the story.
I feel like
because why wouldn't there be?
I feel like version 3 to me is the most believable ending.
Yes. Now, there's a postscript to the story. Now, Breton legend tells that Conomer's evil was such that he was denied, when he died, that he was denied entry into both heaven and purgatory. Instead, he was punished by being doomed to remain on earth to haunt the dark and rock-strewn interiors of the forest in the form of a werewolf. We even got a cryptid in the story.
Oh, shit.
And he was turned into a werewolf that would devour travelers who passed that way, and he could only be killed by the thrust of the knife right through the center of his forehead. We got Dateline true crime, we got enchanted things, we got birds, we got miracles and angels, we got satanic worship, and now we got a werewolf. This is everything vaguely paranormal right here in one damn story. Now, the story of King Conomer contains almost every element in the story of Bluebeard. Murderous husband, a hidden secret, a woman who discovers the truth, and a final reckoning. But the one thing that's missing is a blue beard. Now, there have been many retellings of the story, and many authors have adjusted the details to match cultural fears. In some, Bluebeard is a sorcerer. And in some, Bluebeard is not killed. He just vanishes. He just vanishes, leaving the house empty and intact. And in an obscure German version of the story, the room is a well, and it's filled with bones, not bodies. And the key that is accidentally dropped magically returns on its own. But long before Perrault wrote this tale, there were stories of men with locked rooms that no one dared to enter. There are also men that have mirrored the deeds of Bluebeard in modern times. Henri Desire, I can't even talk now. I was doing so good on the French words, now I script the name. Henri Desiré Landreau was an early 20th century French serial killer that murdered widows and burned their bodies in stoves. I need something to drink. He was known as the Bluebeard of Gamba. And there was also George Joseph Smith. He was an English bigamist who drowned his wives in bathtubs, and he was labeled Bluebeard by newspapers. And the name kind of became a shortcut for a man whose domestic life concealed violence. But you see, there's a psychology to the story of Bluebeard. Yeah, I'm throwing in the psychology. Hey, we all gonna learn something. When Charles Perrault publishes Bluebeard in 1697, he gives his main character a detail that immediately unsettles readers. The blue beard. Not demon red or deathly black. It was blue like bruises, or like skin that was starved for air, like he had been poisoned. And blue was also associated with the unnatural and the demonic. But Perrault never explains why the character's beard is blue because uncertainty is critical. Bluebeard is not introduced as a monster. He's introduced as a question. And the color of the beard gives us a hint that something's wrong with the man. But wrongness alone is not enough to condemn a powerful man. And modern psychologists point out that the story of Bluebeard mirrors real abusive dynamics. Control disguised as generosity, freedom offered with invisible limits, and punishment is framed as being deserved. Because, see, Bluebeard doesn't hide the door. He creates it. And by forbidding it and giving a key, he is almost ensuring that the door will be opened.
Mm-hmm.
This is not trust. It is a test that is designed to fail. And this allows him to justify the killing. The crime is pre-justified, and it is a psychological trap. And perhaps this is why the story has endured, because it isn't about curiosity. The story is about power. And strangely enough, this is the least supernatural of all of Perrault's tales, with no beasts or fairies or ogres. The enchanted key is the only magical object, and it is the one of the demise. And the locked door has become a symbol that is continually used in novels, fictions, and horror films. It is a space that contains truth, but accessible only by transgression. And that once opened, life can never go back to the way it was. And that locked door came from the story of Bluebeard. Now, in medieval Europe, secrecy was power. Noble household thrived on silence. Servants were paid to forget what they saw, and wives were expected to do the same. And by the time Perrault publishes the story, it's been refined into something safe enough to tell, and safe because it was labeled as fiction. And Bluebeard endures because he never explains himself. He doesn't claim madness. He doesn't seek forgiveness. He simply enforces the rules that he created for control. And every generation and culture has retold this story. The forbidden door remains in all the tellings. It is the psychology of control that existed long before there was a name for it. But Perrault always softens his bloody tales with a moral. But the moral is oddly conflicted. His moral is pretty much says that he warns against curiosity, but then he states that men like Bluebeard no longer exist. Well, history disagrees. Because you see, every generation wants to believe that the monster is gone. Connemara had wives, Gilles de Rais had victims, and Bluebeard had a system. And they say the system always works until it doesn't. The pattern keeps resurfacing. Different names, different houses, but the same locked room. Even now, people are still taught not to open doors that make powerful men uncomfortable. And that is not a fairy tale. That is a case history, and that is a true confession. We like our villains to be obvious. We want them to look dangerous and to present themselves with fear and rage. But evil doesn't announce itself with thunder. It offers comfort. And the stories that endure are the ones where the villains look respectable, successful, and important. Perhaps the moral of the story isn't don't be curious. Perhaps it's pay attention to what power hides. And remember, behind every locked door, is a story that is waiting for someone to turn the key. So, gentlemen, what do we think of the story of Bluebeard? Now, who is our most likely candidate, Gilles de Rais or Connemar the Accursed?
I think I'm gonna have to go with Connemar the Accursed at this point.
Yeah,
I agree.
I would say so, because it seems to match up way more than Gilles de Rais. I mean, Gilles de Rais could have had something to do with the inspiration for Bluebeard, but I think it's more Connemar. Now, something you didn't say, and I think could also have been of influence. Think about like biblically, like think about the Garden of Good and Evil. Where
okay, so that actually was
not good and
referenced,
evil,
and I
but
found that reference everywhere. They reference Psyche and Cupid. They reference Adam and Eve. But see, that's the story of curiosity. But the story of Bluebeard really is not about curiosity. It's about power.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, but it's one of those things where it's like you can have whatever you want, but don't do the thing I tell you not to do. And then once you do what you've done, it can't be undone.
Right.
So I think that there's that seed and that kernel in the story. I think that could have also inspired that. Like, and like with most stories and most folklore, it's a meld and a mesh of like all these different stories that come into one and become a new story.
And all of Perrault's, again, taught a lesson or a moral. But his are very, very conflicted. It doesn't say for women not to be disobedient. It says not to seek things that you are not supposed to have. It doesn't say women don't do it. It's basically don't seek things that you're not supposed to have. That curiosity is could be a downfall. That sometimes it's better to be blissfully ignorant than to see things that you can't unseen. But then he says, but modern men don't do that anymore. He even says that at the end of the moral.
Do you think though that it could have been more of like a warning to the peasantry, like do not seek things where you're not supposed to put your nose because this could happen to you?
You know what? And when I was looking, because there's psychological papers written on Bluebeard. Almost every fairy tale has got psychological papers written about it, breaking it down. I love those. They actually made the comment that it could have been written because remember, this was being performed in the court of a king for the very first time. And only the wealthy could afford books. So these oral traditions that would have to be told, and maybe a servant had overheard the telling in the salon of the king when, it was being presented and would go and repeat the story. Perhaps they do psychologically break down that it could be a warning to peasants not to step above your station, lest you be punished.
Stay in your lane or you'll be punished. Yeah.
Yep. Do not try to step above your station. That actually is one of the things that they did. Can't remember which, because I looked at a couple psychological journal articles about it. And that is one of the things they say, that it also could be a warning to peasants that don't try to marry above your station. Don't try to step above your station. You are what you are, and we are what we are. Yeah. That it's definitely drawing a line between the haves and the have-nots as well. Because remember, the girl, she came from a good family.
Right.
But Bluebeard was vastly wealthy. He had so much wealth that he impressed the woman who married him. So she was okay as far as the money went, but he was vastly wealthy. So
do you get the sense that in the story he was going to murder her no matter what and stuff her in that room, or had all the wives?
Which story? The fairy tale, the Connemar?
The fairy tale. Like the fairy tale, because
she was always going to die.
She was always going to die because because he told her not to look into the room. And I wonder if it's one of those things like where all the wives who had looked into the room were the ones that ended up in that room versus she's probably going to die.
Interpret Perrault's work from
based on the context. So what do you think?
Story says that every wife has died. That he had married all of these women and they all mysteriously vanished. I read you Perrault's version.
Right.
So I think she was always going to die because, again, it was a psychological trap. You can go anywhere you want to, but here's the key for this little room. Don't go near it. He was pre-justifying his crime of killing her.
I feel like there's a lot of psychology that's coming into play here. For me, I think that's the way the system was always designed, and I think that that's why the story thrives so well. Is because, well, how do you keep people, in a state of not asking questions about the powerful people? You give them stories like this. Well, don't do that, or you're going to end up like this. Let's make sure that this telling of what happened to this person that asked too many questions gets pushed out there so that nobody asks any more questions.
That's right.
I think it's been happening for all of history, still happening. So I think that that's why that this story survives so well. And I think that there's a psychology of oppression behind it, and why it gets retold in so many different ways. Like, oh, no, don't look behind the door. Because the last person that looked behind the door, we offed. I'm just going to put it that way.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yep.
Well, exactly.
It's even mirrored in the telling of the Wizard of Oz. Don't look behind the door.
Well, exactly. Because even back then, you're looking at people like Gilles de Rais. Is that his name?
Gilles de Rais.
Okay, just making sure I didn't get his name wrong. Gilles de Rais and Conor the Accursed. We're talking about documented people here.
Real life people.
Very powerful people. How do you get power? You overtake, you overthrow, you win. You're the victor in history. Well, in order to do that, you got to have some nasty skeletons in your closet, and that's not going to be any different back then than it is now. And so we design these kind of psychological things where it's like, we're going to make sure that everybody knows you don't do this, you don't ask questions, you don't step a toe outside of line, because if you do, here's what happens.
And the powerful people surround themselves, just like you said, with people who say yes. They're yes men. They don't ask questions. They blindly follow.
Yep.
There is no critical thinking. It is, I will follow you because I want to stand with you and go to the parties you go to and know the people that you know. Yeah.
It mirrors a lot of what's in the news right now. With everything, with the power and people being associated with said power and things of that nature. Yeah, like as long as you don't look any further, everything's cool. But if you go any further, then we have a problem.
Yeah,
so
I would agree with that.
That's why I threw that little line in. Even now, people are still taught not to open doors that make powerful men uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's true. I mean, I'm not gonna go. You all know what we're talking about. I'm just not going to go into depth about it on this podcast. Because we're talking about Bluebeard. I'm not going to turn this into a
we are talking in
topic.
General.
Everybody knows
powerful
what we're
men
talking
do
about.
not like to be investigated.
But I would say, if we're going back to the story of Bluebeard, I'm going to have to go with it being Conor the Accursed, because you said that was in 6th century. So 6th century would have been between what, 501
even earlier.
Yeah, so we're talking about like 501 to the 500s, basically. It's interesting to me how much it lines up, and then you spin in one tiny little detail about a enchanted magical key, and then obviously I was going to touch when you were explaining about Bluebeard, why he has a blue beard. That is something that Charles Perrault himself could have just been like, whatever, let's give him a blue beard. Because it goes back to like things that we talked about on this podcast, where it's like the Men in Black type scenario, where it's like, yeah, they look like people, but there's one thing that's just slightly off that makes them suspicious about, should I trust this person? Should I not? And I think that that's what, honestly, I think that was a design by Perrault.
I agree.
So do I think that there's truth in the story of Bluebeard? Absolutely 100%. And if I had to pinpoint somebody in history that this story points back to, it's got to be Conor the Accursed, because that lines up really fucking well. And I mean, we're talking about a difference of 1100 years, or more, something like that. But legends endure because they're legends, because they're fantastical in nature. So reason why we still know some of these, like Elizabeth Bathory to this day, You know, Ryan, what century was she in? Wasn't she like the 1500s or something like that?
Yeah, I think she's like
Yeah.
1486 or 1586. I can't remember,
Yeah.
something like that around there.
She was kind of around the time of like Queen Elizabeth I type thing, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I mean, we're still talking about her over 500 years later. She's a legend
because
these
of her
people
brutality.
did horrific things back then. So I'm gonna have to land this one squarely on the shoulders of Conor the Accursed. I think that's where this story originates because I'm a true firm believer that there is a grain of truth in every single fairy tale.
Well, let me tell you something I did not put in the story.
Okay.
Because there is a Saint Trophine. She is a saint. Her story was recorded in books in the churches. So Conor, he did exist. And the story of her resurrection by St. Gildas is in those books that have survived all this time. So she is real. Conor is real. And St. Gildas is real. So I have to believe that there is something real in this story.
Yeah.
So, Ryan, who do you want to go into final thoughts? Ryan, do you want to give me your final thoughts on who you think it all lines up on?
I mean, I think it's Conor. I think that story has been passed down from generation to generation for so long, and I think maybe Charles Perrault wanted to put his spin on it, and so he adapted that into his Bluebeard story. So I definitely think it definitely lines up with him more so. But you were saying really quick, kind of not to gloss over what you just said. So she is actually canonized and in
Yes,
a
Saint
and
Trophine, the patron saint of babies yet to be born.
Okay, and is her in her canonization story? Is are any of these elements in that canonization story? We're able to find that
her son is also canonized with her, and he is Saint Timur. Please, my Catholic friends, I took one quick look at this. Ryan is asking me about something I kind of looked through very quickly. I believe her son is Tremere, Tremere, Saint Tremere, I believe. I remember spelling is better than I remember how to say the words.
Right.
Saint Tremere, he is canonized next to her, and I did have a picture of them, of one of their statues that is in one of the churches.
Yes, Tremere, Tremeur.
See, okay, I was close. See, Tremere, got it.
You had it.
Yeah. I was trying because I'm like going. I read through that very quickly. I cut part of that out. I'm like, I don't remember, but yeah, I think that there has to be some kind of what they in that day would have considered a miracle that happened.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's interesting.
All right.
God, we all agree. Crazy.
Blake, your final thought?
Like I said, Conor the Accursed. And I guess this is the one that has the most quote unquote evidence to me that could link Bluebeard to an actual real life historical figure. So that's one I'm gonna have to go with.
All right. Well, gentlemen, did you like the stories tonight?
Yeah, they're really good.
Fantastic. Wild.
Very interesting.
It truly. So, gentlemen, the story of Bluebeard. Again, this is one, and I remember being read this as a child. My grandmother had a Charles Perrault book of fairy tales. I heard the real story of Snow White and Rose Red. I heard the real story of Cinderella with the sisters lopping their toes and their heels off. And I heard the story of Bluebeard. And it's always been one that has fascinated me. And so when I found it, I was like, you know what? This is truly an everything vaguely paranormal story.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really is. When you look at the real people behind the stories, and there's almost always a real person that is the inspiration. The two that came up, Gilles de Rais and Conor the Accursed, they both fascinated me. And a lot of people lean towards Gilles de Rais purely for the brutality and the time length. But I'm in agreement. I think Conor the Accursed more likely fits this blueprint for Bluebeard. And author Charles Perrault gave the man a blue beard because he wanted the reader to know something was wrong with him.
Yeah.
He wanted them to be uncertain. So I love these stories. I love fairy tales. You can't go wrong with a cursed key, somebody, summoning demons, a miracle from God with a resurrection, and a wonky bird that's carrying a magical ring to call a saint to save your ass, and then turns the dude into a werewolf. That is everything vaguely paranormal at its finest. And with that, Blake, why don't you tell them everything they need to know?
All right, sounds good. Here's your announcements from us. If you want to support the show directly, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/EVP podcast. For just $5 a month, you'll unlock over 450 Patreon exclusive videos, including the pre and post broadcast, which are the 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after this live broadcast. So you're getting an additional hour with us each week. Your support from this goes directly back into the show and towards the adventures that we bring you week after week. If you are not sure about joining Patreon, try it risk-free with our 7-day free trial. Make sure you stay connected with us. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and many more by searching Everything Vaguely Paranormal and looking for the green sound wave. And remember, you can catch us live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook and YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to our Eventbrite page to be notified when more public investigation tickets go on sale. We do have currently 3 events that will be, or that are 2 overnight investigations to the Old Park Hotel in Ballinger, Texas. And we are also working on releasing Broadhead Manor tickets.
Who want to go to Broadhead?
Just secured that location as well. That is in Broadhead, Wisconsin. So for you in the South who are our followers, we know that we have quite a few there. That might be a trek. But anyways, we will
call your friends, rent a van, and everybody go together and go with us to Broadhead.
And also, don't forget to check out our merch store for all your favorite merch. T-shirts, coffee mugs, stickers, pillows, hoodies, and so much more. To make it easier, we have added all of our links to our link tree, which will be on the Everything Vaguely Paranormal Facebook and X profiles Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, as well as in all of our show notes for you audio listeners, or you can simply search linktr.ee/Everything Vaguely Paranormal. We're grateful for your continued support. Every like, comment, share, and download keeps the adventures alive. So if you have a favorite episode, share it with your friends. One of the easiest things you can do to help out our show and its rankings, if you have a Spotify account or wherever you get your audio from, head over there and simply download our episodes and leave us a review. If you have a story, comment, or question, or you would like to be a guest on the show or have us as guests on your show, email us at theevppod@gmail.com. That is THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Go like, share, and subscribe to that YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up, say hello, let us know you were here. So we want to thank you guys for joining us tonight on Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Shelley Pruitt, my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Mr. Ryan Roberts. Thank you for being here. And as always, we will see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.